That is kind of how my art students feel when they go out looking for erasers to buy for drawing. So there is infinite variety out there, and it can be very confusing. And what do we use these for? And how many do I buy? And what's the best kind of eraser? I'm not going to talk about the best brand here. You know, you kind of have to make a decision about what you like and stick with it. It means you might have to take a few out for a test drive. But there are just a few I think that are really, really helpful. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about them. Let's start with this. This is a vinyl eraser, and it can come in kind of the square shape. It can be sort of those ones you find at the school supply sales in the fall, and they stick kind of on the end of your pencil. They can be on the back of a mechanical pencil. And if you have one of the clamp mechanical pencils where you change out the lead, a lot of times they'll come with an eraser under the cap or refills for it. And they're not always a cylinder shape. You can buy them kind of in wedge shapes and skinnier and fatter. It just sort of depends on what you like. But let's look at first these vinyl erasers here for a second. Now, I happen to like vinyl erasers because they tend to erase cleanly. They don't tend to rip or tear at your paper. And because they come in different sizes and shapes, I mean, I think I got a whole box of 48 of these for like maybe $8. So I'm set for a while on erasers on the back. I also like using the lead in these, but we'll talk about that in a different one. These I like if I'm shading and I want to pull out some highlights for hair. Same thing for this one. And these I like to use if I make a really, really big mistake. So I'm going to just put a little bit of graphite down here on this paper here for a second. And I like to hold my pencil overhand because I get more of that side, and so I tend to cover a little more ground more quickly. So when I use a vinyl eraser here and I say, oh, I don't really like this thing on the side, you know, it'll erase fairly cleanly. You can see that it leaves some debris. Usually my students do this and it causes streaking, so a lot of times I just blow on the pencil and the eraser shavings that kind of pop up. This one is kind of nice for getting into tight areas and fixing the spot. And same thing for this one right here. You can just pop that onto an end of a pencil. And again, it will erase fairly cleanly. I have a tendency to like the ones on the mechanical pencil better than I like these ones that you put on top, but they do have a use for them, and they're really cheap. I think I got a package of 12 for maybe $1.50. So really not too expensive at all, and they definitely will work in a bind. So those are kind of vinyl erasers here. A lot of times students just arrive with a good old yellow number 2 pencil and a pink eraser. I think that the yellow number 2 pencil is really good for shading. I mean, I think it gets kind of in the B range for shading. But as far as the eraser goes, it'll do the job. You can see it's not erasing quite as easily as those vinyl erasers did too. And there's a lot of pumice that's built into a pink eraser. So not only is it rough, it'll sometimes tear your paper, or if it's a really bad eraser, it'll often leave pink streaks. So I don't tend to use the pink erasers at all. I kind of find them sort of more damaging than helpful. Another one, I'm going to give you another little square here. And for those of you who are bothered by debris and textures, we'll just kind of swoop that away for you. So a gum eraser is also very common. You can kind of see that. I think they're kind of they leave the most debris. So I'm not a huge fan. We used to use these for drafting work when everything was done by hand instead of on a computer. They still work okay, but I think they leave a lot of crumbs, and sometimes they're just they wear down a little faster, but they definitely work. And then, of course, there's the famous Kneaded eraser, which for my 7th graders, they love sculpting it and playing with it because it's like having a piece of putty in your hand. I tend to pinch off just a chunk of it because they get dirty and they do wear out, and so it's kind of nice to not use it up and keeps them in reserve. If you're using them, I mean, they are kind of fun to play with, let's be honest, right? People clean them by stretching them out. Now, I think these are really terrible erasers if you're wanting to get rid of a mistake. I think of them more as being like mops. So let's say I actually want to lighten an area. I might come in here and tap down. I can either press hard or lightly, and I can actually lighten an area. So if I shaded a whole area in because it was a lot easier, and then I want to pull a highlight out, I'll a lot of times use my kneaded eraser just to mop up a little bit of that lead. Or if I wanted to soften an edge and my pressure control is not that great, sometimes you can use it to kind of tap along the edge and soften a value quite a bit. So these are great. Now you can see that it's pretty dirty there, right? And so if I do that and I stretch this guy out, all of that goes bye-bye. It does get, after time, really dirty, and it kind of feels like sticky, like chewing gum. So if your eraser starts to get really dark and you've been cleaning it and it starts to feel kind of sticky, like you're taking chewing gum, then it's probably kind of worn out and it probably needs to go in the garbage. And that's why I tend to only pinch off what I need, and then I have a whole bunch more to use when this guy eventually wears out. So those are the basics of what I would use. Again, I'm not a fan of the pink ones. I think sometimes they can be more destructive to the paper, even though they're cheap. And sometimes they'll leave pink streaks on the paper that really frustrate students because they can't get rid of them. So that's the basics. Now, in the next section, I want to actually show you a little bit about how your eraser can be used as a drawing tool rather than just for erasing mistakes.